In a survey of 51 people, 27 said that they preferred Coca-Cola over Pepsi. Construct and interpret a confidence interval with 95% confidence of the proportion of people who prefer Coca-Cola. When I read this problem, the first thing that I notice is it wants me to find a 95% confidence interval. And specifically, it's of a proportion. This is telling me that I have to deal with a confidence interval for proportions. Therefore, I need to know p hat, I need to know q hat, and I also need to know a critical value, and that critical value is going to be a z value. If we were to go through our 5 steps, the first step is to make sure that all of our requirements are met. The first one is that this is a random sample. We're going to assume that it is random. Then the second thing is that it has to fulfill bins. It has to be binary. There's 2 outcomes here. They either prefer Coca-Cola or they prefer Pepsi. The trials have to be independent of each other, which they are. Everybody has their own opinion. N, the probability of success, N is the total number. There has to be a fixed number of trials, and there are 51 people in our experiment or in our survey. So therefore, it's a fixed number. And the probability of success has to be the same for every individual. And in this case, it's 0.5 or 50%, since they have a 50-50 chance of selecting Coke or Pepsi. And then the last one has to be that you have to have a minimum of 5 successes and 5 failures. In this case, we are going to consider the people who prefer Coca-Cola to be our success. Therefore, we had 27 of those, so more than 5 successes and 5 failures. Step 2 is to identify our critical value. Since we are creating a 95% confidence interval, with a confidence level at 95%, our critical value is going to be 1.96. Step 3, we have to now calculate our margin of error. In this case, E is going to be equal to our critical value times the square root of p hat times q hat divided by n. We're going to have 1.96 times the square root of 27 out of 51. That is our probability of success, since those are the number that selected Coca-Cola, times 1 minus 27 over 51. That's our probability of failure, or the probability that an individual selected Pepsi. We're going to divide that by 51. And we get our calculator, and we are going to put in 27 divided by 51 times 1 minus 27 over 51. Divide that by 51. Take the square root of that answer and then multiply by 1.96. We get that E, or our margin of error, is 0.13698925. So then we have to set up our interval. We're going to take our p hat and we're going to subtract away our margin of error, and then take p hat and add our margin of error. Our p hat in this case is 27 out of 51 minus our margin of error. And p hat plus our margin of error will give us our interval. Now 27 divided by 51 minus our margin of error is 0.392, and that's going to be less than our population proportion, and that will be less than 0.666. This tells us that the proportion of people who prefer Coca-Cola is between 0.392 and 0.666. And if we were going to state our full conclusion, we would have to then write down for our final step, we are 95% confident that the interval from 0.392 to 0.666 actually does contain the true population proportion. And as a reminder, this does not mean that we are 95% sure that our population proportion is actually in this interval. It means that if we were to take many samples, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of samples, and we were to construct confidence intervals, 95% of those intervals would actually contain the population proportion.